Hi Matt, I'm Rudy. I'm just going to talk you through really quickly about installation of case type shelving. Um, to start, the first thing you need to do is find your high point on the floor within wherever the run is going to be installed. Ideally, your high point will be at one end of the run or the other, and that's where you would begin building. If your high point falls somewhere in the middle of the run, you have to get a little fancy, figure out the difference from your high point to position at one end or the other, because you have to build from the end. So you'll start at whatever end is simplest, and you'll preemptively shim to match your high point and kind of ballpark it. But usually the high point falls on one end or the other, and that's where you'll begin your build. So when you're starting, the first thing you'll need is an upright. There are two different kinds. There are starters and adders. So this is a starter upright. It only has holes punched on one side of it. So obviously that's your end where you don't have holes punched. So you'll take your starter upright, place it against your wall in your starting position, matched with your high point, or if it is your high point. Once it's there, using a bubble, you'll ensure that you're plumb. Once you're plumb and in the right position, you're just going to anchor it into the wall using whatever anchors are appropriate. If you can hit a stud, you can just screw it in. If there is no stud, we typically use a toggle bolt. You'll anchor it by drilling a hole through this back flange of the upright and anchoring through that hole. To save yourself some hassle, I recommend putting this hole right near the very top of the upright, and I'll explain why in a moment, why that will save you some trouble. So you'll anchor the upright into place, it's plumb, it's positioned, it's good to go, and that's done. The next step, once this is secured, will be to get your first back panel, which will be the big flopping sheet metal. Your back panel then comes in and it inserts into this channel on your upright, and you want to make sure it's fully inserted top to bottom all the way. If it's only partially inserted, you'll end up throwing things out of plumb down the line. So get the back panel fully inserted, nice and clean. Once it's in, if you want, you can save yourself a little hassle by taking a small self-tapping screw and shooting it through the end to hold the panel in place temporarily. Otherwise, what I usually do is get that back panel in, and then I'll grab my next upright. This will be an adder upright, an intermediate upright. It'll have holes punched on both sides. I'll take that next upright and I'll insert it onto the back panel on the other end of the panel, creating our first unit. Once that's fully inserted, I'll throw my clips into the holes, load my first shelf on, and once that shelf is on, it holds everything together for you temporarily until you can anchor your next upright. So getting a shelf on as soon as you've got things put together will save you having to hold things in place. I actually recommend getting two shelves in, put one in a little further up and one down low. By having two shelves installed, that will ensure that your second upright is plumb along with your first upright. The shelves will force this upright plumb. Once that's all together, you will then anchor your next upright just as you did the first one. Actually, first you should level that. Make sure that that is level. You can use your bubble, placing it on the shelf that you put in, and use that bubble to ensure that your second upright is level with your first one. The trick I forgot to mention, the reason you want to anchor up high on your uprights is when you insert your back panel, before you put it in, take a pair of snips and just clip a little 45 triangle off the upper right corner, in this case, of your back panel. So when it inserts in, it will not interfere with the anchor that you've put in here. Otherwise, this anchor might make it difficult to insert the panel because it might be in the way. But by clipping that little corner of your back panel, you can then insert it without interfering with the anchor. So once you've got that panel in and everything put in, you lock your next upright in, and you proceed just like that the rest of the way down the line. Once it's anchored, insert your next back panel with the corner clipped, get that panel fully inserted, put the next upright on, add two shelves to force it plumb, level your next upright, and anchor it. Next back panel, next upright, two shelves, level, anchor, and you proceed like that all the way down the line of your run. Once your run is fully installed with every single upright anchored in one point and your shelves in, you just finish shelving out the rest of the system with the clips and the shelves and the bases and the tops, and you're good to go. The bases you can generally identify. They'll have a built-in, usually 4-inch kick base on them, so they're a little different. The canopy top shelves are also slightly different. They have a larger fascia on the front of them, and they're shaped a little differently, so you'll see that. I also should mention, as you're working, You may also need to shim the back panels themselves because you ideally want them to stay flush and at the same height as your uprights. If they end up sitting lower, you'll end up creating a small gap at the top of the shelving where the wall will be exposed. So you want to keep your back panels the same elevation as your uprights if you're doing a lot of shimming. If this is going to be a run with an additional run built on top for extra height, the way to do that is build your first run in its entirety as normal. Once that's built, leveled, anchored, placed against the wall, you take this coupler piece, and this just fits right over the top of your upright like that, and that creates a coupling point. So your next upright will sit right in that channel. There are small holes usually. You can just shoot a zippy through that to hold that in place. But then you essentially build your upper run in the same exact fashion as you built your lower run, anchoring each of those uprights into the wall as well, following pretty much the exact same process. You won't really have to level because you'll have already done that on the lower run, so it should just fall in nice and level on its own. You'll just be working up high, so go slow and be careful, but that's basically it. You're just using this as a support piece to then place the next run directly on top of the run you've already installed.